Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell is visiting Hazard today during a break from his duties in Washington. We'll talk to the Senate Majority Leader about the presidential race, Kentucky's gubernatorial race, what's happened since Republicans took control of the Senate, and some of today's hot topics on Issues and Answers, the Mountain Edition.
Issues and Answers, the Mountain Edition, is sponsored by the City of Hazard. Come home to the mountains.
It's a pleasure to have U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell with us in the studio today. Good to see you, Senator.
Glad to be back.
Well, let's start with the presidential race. The big question right now is, will Vice President Joe Biden run? What's your feeling on that?
Gosh, I have no idea. I've sort of conspicuously stayed out of the presidential race, not surprising to you. I'm certainly going to support my colleague Rand Paul. But I do think in the November election, when we finally get through all the preliminaries, there's going to be one core issue confronting the American people. Do they want 4 more years, just like the last 8, or do they think we can do better by taking a different path? I think inevitably this will be a 3rd term for Barack Obama type of election. Think of 1988, when it was widely thought that Bush 41 was elected because people were happy with Reagan. They thought it was a great 8 years and they wanted 4 more. I think when all is said and done, all the maneuvering around, that's what it's going to get down to. Are we really happy with where the country is, or do we need to go in a different direction?
If the Vice President does decide to run, who would you prefer to see as the Democratic nominee, him or Hillary Clinton?
I don't think it makes any difference, because I think both of them are a part of the current administration and would, arguably be advocating more of the same. And if the American people decide they want more of the same, then I think the Democrats have an advantage. If, on the other hand, they think a 2% growth rate, kind of stumbling along here like we have in recent years, is not good enough, then I think they're going to be in the mood for making a change.
Obviously, on the Republican side, Donald Trump is getting a lot of attention, appealing to many Republicans right now. Do you think it's possible he could be the nominee?
Well, look at what's happening in the Democratic Party. I mean, Bernie Sanders, who runs as a socialist, that's literally what he puts on the label, not Democrat, but socialist, got 28,000 people at a rally in Portland the other day, even bigger crowds than some of the crowds that some of the Republicans have gotten. I think it's going to all sort itself out. I'm not going to sort of get into it and prognosticate who might be the winner, but I do think the American people probably are going to want to go in a different direction, and I think our nominee is going to be arguing for that.
Why do you think Trump is appealing to so many people right now?
I think that there are all kinds of candidates out there appealing to all kinds of people. We'll see how it lasts.
Well, you mentioned supporting Rand Paul. He just got what he wanted, can now run for president and re-election to the Senate. Were you in favor of a caucus next year in the Republican Party?
No, but I was willing to do it for Rand, because under our state law you can't be on the ballot for 2 different things at the same time.
Right.
I was willing to support it on a one-time basis because it was a unique situation where we had somebody who was actually up for re-election in the Senate and also run for president at the same time. This is not something we're going to do in the future, but I thought he was entitled to get his shot at the presidential, and this makes it easier for him to do that.
You have disagreed with Senator Paul on some issues like extending anti-terrorism legislation. Do you think you would work well with Senator Paul if he did become president?
Well, we certainly do disagree on what's called the Patriot Act, the act that was passed in the wake of the 9/11 attack. And nevertheless, I still support Rand. I would try to convince him otherwise were he to become president.
Another presidential candidate, Ted Cruz, recently accused you of lying and rebuked your record and your argument that the new Republican majority has fulfilled its promises to voters. Your response to that?
Well, look, you've asked me about 3 different times to try to get into the presidential race. I'm not going to start commenting on what various presidential candidates may say. I will be happy to talk to you about the record of the new Senate majority if you'd like to.
Have you ever lied to Ted Cruz?
I'd be happy to talk to you about the record of the new Senate majority if you'd be.
Well, how do you feel about the record so far?
It's been quite productive. I mean, we had a dysfunctional Senate. How do you measure dysfunction? Last year there were 15 roll call votes on amendments the whole year, 2014, the whole year. This year we've had 162 so far, most of them by the Democratic minority. 4 of the last 5 years the Senate didn't pass a budget, which is required by law. We've done that. And then I've tried to look for things where there's some bipartisan support that we can make progress on for the country. The Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act, which we'll be voting on in September. We did a rewrite of No Child Left Behind, which all the K through 12 educators all across the country have been asking us to do. We, on a bipartisan basis, did Trade Promotion Authority, giving this president and the next one the opportunity to enter into trade agreements and get them voted on in Congress, up or down. Why is that important? I think there's a lot of confusion about trade. Of the countries that we currently have free trade agreements with right now, we enjoy a $60 billion surplus. In other words, we sell that much more to them than they sell to us. America's a great trading nation. We have been going back to the founding of the country. We also did a multi-year highway bill. That hadn't been done in 10 years. So what I've tried to do is to look for things that were important for the country that we could accomplish, even though we do have divided government. I mean, we have a Democrat in the White House and we have a Republican Congress. We've had divided government a lot since World War II. When the American people choose divided government, they're not saying we don't want you to do anything. They're saying, see what you can agree on and do that. So that's been the hallmark of the first half of the year with the new Senate majority and the new Senate majority leader, the guy you're looking at. Mm-hmm. We are going to have some big battles here in the second half of the year over spending. Our Democratic friends want to spend more on everything. We'd like to spend more on defense, and so there will be a kind of grand negotiation here in the fall between the two sides over just how much the discretionary budget of the United States government ought to be and how that ought to be spent.
I want to talk about the gubernatorial race briefly. Mm-hmm. You've endorsed Matt Bevin, who mm-hmm. was once a rival, but do you plan on actively campaigning for him as we go down the home stretch? Yeah,
I do. I think he's got a great chance of winning. We're never going to change Kentucky unless we change the state government. Not just the governor's office, but also the State House of Representatives, which will be up next year, which has been in Democratic hands with one 2-year exception since the Civil War. Mm-hmm. And the other states around us are moving forward, Indiana, Tennessee. There's agendas that would change our state and make it competitive have been bottled up in the State House. Having a new governor and a new State House would begin to change that. We need to do things like pass right to work, like have the possibility of having public charter schools, like changing the prevailing wage laws, like having medical review panels. I mean, we're losing a lot of business in this state and not attracting new business because our environment here as a result of the Democratic governor and the Democratic State House is just not conducive in a very competitive environment in which states are competing with each other for jobs. We're not doing very well.
As Governor Beshear gets set to leave office, what grade would you give him?
You know, the governor's basically been a typical liberal Democratic governor. I mean, I've known Steve, we were in law school together. He was a liberal then, he's a liberal now. So he's done what liberal governors do, maintain the status quo. And the problem for our state is the status quo is not good enough. There are states around us that we have to compete with that are moving forward, and we're just sort of sitting here treading water. So I'm not going to give Steve a grade, but he's pretty much done what I would expect a liberal Democrat governor to do, which is more of the same.
Well, it's just a coincidence, I guess, that you're both in Hazard today, along with Congressman Rogers. Later, they're announcing this major broadband project as part of the SOAR initiative. What do you think about that specifically, and do you think SOAR has been a success so far?
Well, I hope it will be, and I think it's a good thing to do. I mean, I also don't believe we ought to give up on coal yet. You know, coal has a future. The question is whether coal has a future in this country. The president's doubled down on the coal industry in a big way. And from a coal point of view, I'm counting the days until the president is gone, and hopefully we have someone new who doesn't have the level of antipathy toward the coal industry that this administration has demonstrated. I mean, the president said it when he ran back in 2008. He said utility rates will inevitably skyrocket, and of course that's in the process of happening. And all around us here in Hazard, we see the lost jobs everywhere that have come as a result of the federal government's antipathy toward coal. Fortunately, a lot of other countries don't share that, and we still have the possibility of an export market. We still have the possibility we get a new president with a different view of reinvigorating the domestic coal industry, but it's been tough. And so SOAR is important, whether coal continues or coal doesn't. We've always wanted to have a more diversified economy in eastern Kentucky, and I applaud what the governor and Congressman Rogers are doing.
Several communities recently have got behind President Obama's Power Plus plan to spend $1 billion over 5 years in an effort to help areas hurt by the downturn in the coal industry. Do you support the president on this?
Well, he ought to do something for coal country, given what he's done to create unemployed miners. I mean, it's the least he can do is try to step in after having wiped us out and created so many lost jobs and lost opportunities and moved families moving, looking for work. Yeah, he ought to do something to try to make it up.
So you are supporting him?
Yeah, I mean, good grief. I mean, given what he's done to private sector jobs here, it's cost us a lot more than he wants to do to help make it up.
There is an ongoing debate right now here in Kentucky about county clerks issuing same-sex marriage licenses. As you know, the Rowan County Clerk is fighting it, seems to be determined to take her fight all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Do you support her? Do you think she should continue fighting, or do you think she should resign?
I'm just going to let the state officials sort that out. These are state elected officials, and state government will sort it out in whatever way they think appropriate.
What did you think of the Supreme Court decision?
I didn't approve of the Supreme Court decision, but it's the law of the land.
Another debate in Frankfort that you did chime in on, the statue of Jefferson Davis in the Capitol. They're going to leave it there apparently for now. Do you still believe it should be moved?
Well, I would have done it, but I'm a descendant of a Confederate veteran, and I certainly don't think we ought to wipe out our history. And it's pretty clear to me that the people of Kentucky has actually been polled on that. Kind of like the idea of not forgetting our past, the bad parts as well as the good parts. And I'm not in favor of airbrushing history either. If it were up to me, I'd put Jefferson Davis in the Kentucky History Museum, but I think that they pretty well made a decision, and people seem to like the decision that was made.
There have been several shootings recently here in the U.S. involving law enforcement officers. One terrible one last week involving a reporter and photographer in their profession, ambushed on live television. What's your reaction to all this violence, and what needs to be done about it? I know there's always calls for gun control, which I assume you're against. What is the answer?
Mental health is a serious problem in this country. And in every one of these shootings that have occurred as a result of someone who's mentally deranged, we all end up going back and studying that individual's history and finding numerous opportunities where people kind of miss the chance to get them the help they obviously needed. There's no more vexing problem, it seems to me, than trying to ascertain who has got this level of mental deficiency and who may do something about it. Charles Krauthammer, who's on Fox News now as one of the political commentators, is a trained psychiatrist. And I heard him talking one night about how back when he began his career years ago as a psychiatrist, it was easier to incarcerate people that you anticipated had these kinds of problems. And then the trends changed over the years, and there were a number of groups that felt we were incarcerating too many people, detaining and treating too many people, and interfering with their ability to lead a normal life. It is a really tough problem to try to figure out who's going to do something like this. I don't have the solution to that, and I don't think there's any law that we could pass that would solve that problem.
Would you ever support any more gun control?
No.
The Lexington Herald yesterday, I don't know if you read the Lexington Herald, but it says Kentucky tops the nation in the percentage of students who were homeless during the 2012-2013 school year. Anything you're doing to try and change those numbers?
Well, we just passed a complete rewrite of No Child Left Behind, which is the federal aid to K through 12 education in Kentucky. But as you know, education is the principal responsibility of every state government. It's the biggest part of every state government budget, the biggest responsibility for every governor and every state legislature in the country. I think that, you know, that's the appropriate level of government to address that. We do provide aid to education, both elementary and secondary and higher education. But no, I don't have a particular program in mind. I'm not surprised. I mean, a lot of that has to do with the meltdown of the family in this country. More and more single parents who find it very difficult to survive financially. It's a tough situation.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Iran a moment ago. Do you see any way now that Congress can kill the president's deal with Iran, which you obviously don't like?
I hope so. The president wanted this to be an executive agreement only, with no congressional involvement at all. Mm-hmm. He could have submitted a treaty under the Constitution. A treaty would have required 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate to approve it, but it would have had the binding effect of law. What he wanted to do was an executive agreement only, and there were enough Democrats in the House and Senate who were uncomfortable with that they joined with us in passing a bill called the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act, which required him to submit the deal to us if he made a deal, which he did. Mm-hmm. But it is still tilted in his direction because under the law, I, as the majority leader, for example, can bring up either a resolution of approval or a resolution of disapproval. Obviously, I'm going to bring up the latter. If that were to pass the Senate and pass the House, he could veto that. And then the veto could be sustained, in other words, upheld by 1/3 plus 1 in either house. Now, so the Democrats, in effect, are going to determine whether this is approved, because not a single member of my conference, and I believe that's the case in the House, not a single member of the Republican conference supported. So it will really be among Democrats. And they've been in anguish, as you've noticed, because there's been a huge effort against the agreement and a huge effort in favor of it. But in the end, the Democrats will determine what happens. And so far, it looks like in the Senate, we've only got 2 Democrats who publicly announced opposition. I'm hoping there will be more. I hope we can defeat it. It's a very bad deal. On the substance of it, just to quickly run, it leaves Iran as a nuclear threshold state. It does nothing about their exportation of terrorism, nothing whatsoever. The inspection regime, the International Atomic Energy Agency has this agreement with the Iranians. They didn't want to show it to anybody. Now it's leaked out. And it turns out that the inspections regime basically allows the Iranians to do their own inspections. In other words, they give them enough notice before you can go there. As one of my colleagues once said, imagine if you're an NFL player and you get to select your own urine sample. The chances are pretty good. You're going to look okay. Mm-hmm. So it's a very bad deal. Let me just say one thing finally. It is still an executive agreement only. So a year and a half from now, a new president can take a look at it and decide whether or not they think it's working. And all options are still open because it's not a treaty.
Do you think our relations with Israel have suffered because of this?
Absolutely. Not only with Israel, but the Sunni Arab states that have been allied with us for years, the Saudis, the Egyptians, the United Arab Emirates, they are queasy about us now. Just a month ago, a Saudi official was in Moscow talking to President Putin about buying arms. I saw the other day one of the leaders from UAE sitting by Vladimir Putin in Moscow. They're hedging their bets. They are not sure we're dependable anymore. So we have, if the president wanted to transform the Middle East, he has. Our enemies don't respect us, and our friends are very skittish about what being allied with the United States these days is worth.
Back here at home, it seems like, and I mentioned the shootings earlier, race relations. It seems like they're getting worse, not better. Would you agree with that?
Well, I hope that's not the case. Look, we've come a long way in this country. I'm old enough to remember when the Voting Rights Act was passed. African American voting participation now is higher than white voting participation. Mississippi has more African American elected officials than any other state in America. One of my colleagues, Tim Scott, an African American, is a U.S. Senator from South Carolina. Before that, he was a congressman from South Carolina, and he defeated, in his congressional race, he defeated Strom Thurmond's son in the congressional district that has Fort Sumter, where the first shots of the Civil War were fired. It is not in dispute that we've come a long way, but clearly there are still challenges. And I think America is always kind of a work in progress. You know, we try to keep working on what our deficiencies are and improving them. But to say that we haven't made an enormous amount of progress, particularly in the last 50 years, would be to deny the obvious.
I asked for some viewer questions for you on social media, and judging by the comments we received, a lot of people are still unhappy with Congress.
Oh, yeah.
What do you have to do to turn that around?
You know, I'm not sure it's possible. People are not happy with the condition of the country. Mm-hmm. And so it is logical and normal, if you're not happy with the condition of the country, to blame the people you elect, whose responsibility it is to try to do something about that. The presidential campaigns also are largely negative on both sides. The people are more running against things than for things. Look, I think that atmosphere we just have to work through. And as I told you, we've made substantial progress in getting the Senate back to work. I'm sorry that it's not noticed by more people, but that's a fact. And we are no longer just kicking the can down the road and not addressing any of the problems that exist. To expect that to be widely noticed, I think in the middle of a presidential campaign in which you've got candidates on both sides decrying the condition of the country and talking about how bad things are, it's pretty hard to turn the national mood around. And I understand that people aren't happy with the condition of the country. I'm not either.
Well, here's an example of one question one person wanted me to ask you. Why will you not stand up to President Obama and the EPA like you promised? And what happened to you and Speaker Boehner standing up to a lawless White House?
Well, we are standing up to them, but it's important to remember in the Constitution, the President of the United States can veto a bill or sign a bill. The thought that we could completely stop Barack Obama by electing a Republican Congress, I never claimed that last year. We have stood up to him, but to succeed, you have to get a presidential signature. Mm-hmm. And that's just the way the Constitution has worked for over 200 years. So I can't change the condition of the country with this guy in the White House. We have been able to change some things, but we haven't been able to change everything. To achieve what we want to achieve on EPA, we need a new president, and we'll find out whether we get one. We will get one, but we'll find out which kind of president we're going to get here in about a year and a half.
How do you feel about term limits?
I'm not in favor of term limits. We have them now. They're called elections, and people are defeated all the time.
One person asked, why haven't you led the charge against Planned Parenthood?
Well, I have. We just don't have the votes to get the outcome that we'd like. Again, the president has the pen to sign it. You know, if he doesn't sign it, it doesn't happen. But yeah, we've voted on that already in the Senate. We'll vote on it again. But I would remind all of your viewers, the way you make a law in this country, the Congress has to pass it and the president has to sign it. The president's made it very clear he's not going to sign any bill that includes defunding of Planned Parenthood. So that's another issue that awaits a new president, hopefully with a different point of view about Planned Parenthood.
Well, what do you think Republicans need to do to win back the White House?
We need to nominate a candidate who can appeal to purple states, in other words, states that can go either way. You know, Kentucky's almost certainly going to vote for the Republican. California, I'm sure, will vote for the Democrat. But there are about 10 states, the closest one to us is Ohio, that go back and forth and back and forth. And whoever our nominee is going to have to appeal in places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Florida, Colorado, Nevada, those states that tend to go back and forth. And looking at the polling data in those key states, I think people are ready to go in a different direction. We just have to nominate somebody that they find appealing.
Obviously, we're a long way off from you being up for re-election again. Do you think you'll run again, or you ever think about retiring?
I haven't thought about that yet.
Well, what do you think when you get back to Washington your biggest challenge is going to be?
Yeah, funding the federal government. We have some big differences over how much we're going to spend, and we'll have to have a negotiation. The Senate Democrats have a big enough number to prevent us from doing things. They prevented us from doing any of the bills that appropriate money for the government, thereby forcing a negotiation when we go back in after Labor Day, which I'll be engaged in with the administration and others to try to sort out how much we're going to spend and where we're going to spend it.
We only have a couple minutes left. Anything else going on that you wanted to talk about? What do you plan on talking about with EKSEP
Well,
this
let me
afternoon?
just close by thanking people of Eastern Kentucky for their support last year. Here in Perry County, for example, I got 62% of the vote. Carried a number of counties in your viewing area that I'd never carried before: Pike, Breathitt, Knott, Magoffin. It was a great election. I appreciated people's support. We ended up carrying 110 out of 120 counties, winning by 15 points. And as a result of that, Kentucky has a majority leader again for the first time since Alvin Barkley.
All right. Senator McConnell, always a pleasure.
Good to see you.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us. We'll see you again next time on Issues and Answers.